Welcome to the Learning Curve of Life podcast. I'm Dana Stovern, author and your host, and I'll be sharing candid insights about conscious living that I've gleaned from over 20 years of my spiritual path and work as a body-based intuitive life coach and money coach. This podcast is the platform to share my offerings of my written word in voice form to inspire and awaken you, entertain and encourage you, provide hope, and a deeper view into more meaningful living. Thanks for being here and enjoy the words. Toning for Solstice, written December 29th, 2017 in Paonia, Colorado, written about a window of time in Durango, Colorado around 2011. It was springtime on the high-rolling prairies south of the Wamanooch Wilderness in Colorado's southwest. It was that time of year when the Colorado blue sky could not be bluer. The white of the snow-capped mountains with triangular jags that met the blue could not cut the sky any sharper. The slate bluish gray of the mountains below the white could not have given way more beautifully to the soft bud of green on the prairie, which could not be richer with the promise of summer, of growth ahead. The air, so cuttingly fresh without the bite of winter, gave life to this memory that I now write to you. I was driving my red Chevy truck from our cabin on Florida Mesa above the Animas River Valley over the high-rolling prairie to Ignacio, Colorado, the home of the Southern Ute Native American Indian tribe. It was one of the richest, most brilliant springs I've ever experienced, and it was on the first-year anniversary of my near death and the loss of our son. Maybe that's why the pungent air moved through me and left such a memory, because I was beginning to resurface from the numbness, the shock, and the forced movement of life one lives through during thick grief. The drive across the high-rolling prairie that morning felt more like a promise and love of life than a forced burden of living after death and endings, of having to carry promises heartbreakingly unfulfilled. I was on my way to meet with a fellow practitioner in Ignacio who was interested in selling her Reiki Table to me. At the time, I think I was interested in purchasing the table from her, but I wasn't sure. The continued journey of my non-traditional career was unexpected, especially in the midst of the disaster of my life. It moved me like the subtle force of a wandering river from psychic reader to spiritual coach, and now to the unfathomable energy worker and potential healer. It was something like a dandelion forcing itself between the cracks of rubble and taking root, leafing out, and singing its yellow goodness to the sun, not giving a care to anything else. That's what was happening inside of me. The will of whatever the flow of gift that wanted to come through me at a most inopportune time was merely taking its course of action, taking no notice of what I thought or felt. The impulses of the universe did not care about my opinion. I was along for the ride, literally. I pulled my truck into a parking spot at the gleaming new casino that the Southern Ute tribe had rebuilt in the last several years. My friend Mary Alice and her business partner Lisa had a studio in the casino spa housed just off the magnificent entryway of lodgepole columns, a bronze statue, a modern hotel, and the flashing lights of the casino. In stark contrast, on the other side of the parking lot, was the also recently built Native American Indian Southern Ute Museum, housing an incredible iconic collection of tribal historical pieces. Although I always felt the mystery and honor of driving into Ignacio, even that day I had no way of knowing how the incredible gifts and spirit of the Southern Ute legacy would play out in my life in the coming months and now years. I sense that what I write to you now is only a thread of a larger weave of fabric that I am helping to create. And yes, I was given spiritual guidance and permission to share the sacred information that normally I would keep in private protection. I walked across the parking lot and into the casino, meeting Lisa and Mary Alice at their studio. Lisa pulled the chunk of luggage that was the Reiki table out into the waiting area of the lobby. We unzipped the black canvas tote bag and unfolded the table under a massive painting of a buffalo. I thought the buffalo was such a fitting totem to share the space. Lisa and I went over all the parts and pieces of the table. It was a beautiful green table with soft yellow pine wood. It had barely been used. She had stored this extra table in her studio space for several years and did not need it. Since the price was right and I had cash, we made the exchange, an exchange that took a great amount of courage given how slim my finances were at the time and how much I questioned my ability to do healing work. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. The next thing I knew, I was strapping the bulk of a mobile Reiki table across the casino parking lot in the fresh spring air after this international meeting between the Japanese healing arts, Native American Indian traditions, and a bit of Celtic spirit from my Scotch-Irish roots. I heaved the Reiki table, folded up in its bag, over the gate of my truck and slid it into place. I patted it, visualizing it shrouded with protective white light for safe travel. I climbed into my cab, shut the door, and breathed in and sighed out something other than relief. Was it a sigh of commitment? Was it a breath of, wow, we're doing this? Whatever the breath was, the exhale came with a bit of sound. That tweak of sound leaking from my throat pinged every thread in me momentarily. That tweak of sound brought something to life, to light inside of me. I wasn't sure what it was. I'd not really ever made a sound like that. Curious in an unsettled way, I turned the key in my truck's ignition. The engine thrummed to life, and I backed out of my parking lot, maneuvering out of the parking lot to the highway. That's when the spark of curious sound that had twitched in my throat, sending my nerves on alert in a good way, began to flow a little more. A trickle of sound now began to hum and then sing through me, sing through my throat. My truck climbed the weaving road out of the valley from the casino and back to the high-rolling prairie. By the time my red truck and my Reiki table and I were full throttle humming on that black highway back to the cabin, somehow my throat completely opened up in full, angelic-like sequences of singing, of toning with no words, no agenda of song. Yet the sounds coming through my throat were completely unexplainable, inexplicable, phenomenal. I'd never sung like that, ever. I felt so good with springs of musical chords rushing through my throat to the open air of the sky, the boldness of the mountains, the roll of the green prairie. I arrived home to our cabin in a flush of goodwill, a feeling lifted of, doesn't it feel good to be alive? Of course, it took me some time to put two and two together, that I'd never toned like that, or even knew I could tone like that before I had my table. That the toning coming through my throat never left once I had the table, that the toning coming through my throat was connected to that table, that the toning coming through my throat that naturally showed up while clients were on my table in session was connected to their healing, that toning certain tones with the human body and energy field helps move and shift energies in very specific ways, that the harmonic energetic scale of 144 is possible to flow through the human voice in a way that creates miracles. And finally, the key piece, I eventually learned that the woman who sold me the table was the granddaughter of the medicine man of the Southern Ute Nation in Ignacio. Somehow, the ancient ones, the grandmothers and the grandfathers of that tribe, had seen fit to allow the release of a key healing piece from the tribe to a white woman. And when I finally realized all these key pieces flooding together in a picture before me, the thunder of stampeding buffalo rolled through my body. It was one of those moments confirming that I had returned from death and the loss of my son for a reason. I could not have been more humbly honored to receive the Reiki table and the tones that came with it. And ever since, I have honored this healing gift. When the tones begin to roll up through my body, my throat, I do not stop. Even when I feel that it might be embarrassing, I allow the chords to roll through. And there are times when I wonder but still tone, feeling the power of the angels and the indigenous with me. It's in those times that the random confirmations arrive, much like the professional DJ who heard me tone at the opening of the whole Expo Metaphysical Fair in Durango, Colorado this year. When he heard me, he did not know where I was on the floor map, but he heard the opening tones I let roll through my throat box, and halfway through the show, he finally found me and asked, "Have you ever had any training? You have an opera voice." And I told him, "No, it's my throat box, but the sound you hear is spirit, the angels, the indigenous singing through me." And now, the reason I told you this entire story so you know the impact, the gravitas, the joy, and the power of the solstice this year, the second half of this story. This year, solstice night was filled with the darkest dark of the longest night of the year, the darkest dark of a new moon, and the darkest dark of a welcome snowstorm rolling through our valley. Bob, my husband at the time, had lit up our lives in that darkness with white Christmas lights on our outside plum tree, multicolored lights on our deck, lights on our inside Christmas tree, and lights strung through our living room. Ironically, Bob was in bed, ill with the flu, and I was alone with the pets. We were in all that darkness, lit up with the light that Bob had gifted us. The day was nearly done, the dishes were washed, things were tucked in, and it was time. I bundled up, not in a coat, but a thick blanket. I lit a pillar votive candle. I selected a stem of sage, grabbed the salt from the kitchen, and went out into this rich, snowy night alone. Though I went out alone, I felt everyone in my life around me, connected. I felt the world. I felt the lighted stars of who we are in the lighted web of life around the globe, much like the white lights Bob had strung, glowing in the plum tree, soft in the big snowy flakes. The prayer I said to the four directions and the ancients that night, in the wind and snow, in the lighted glow, felt extra special, extra powerful. The white salt mingled with the snowfall in honor. The candle flickered and danced as I held it up to the night sky, meeting the snowflakes. The smoke of sage swirled around us. And when I asked for the singular prayer of peace with my entire self, the thunder of 1,000 buffalo pounded through the sky, swirling around me. That's when my throat completely and utterly opened with the lighted rains of chords and notes flowing through the wind from here to the four directions, the ancients, the angels, the indigenous ones, toning for solstice. You've just listened to an Along the Learning Curve of Life piece with Dana Stovern. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and also sign up for my newest written releases at www.danastovern.com or stay abreast of the current work on my Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter channels. And remember, stay curious, stay aware, and let the universe be your tour guide.